President Cyril Ramaphosa and the Defence Minister Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula publicly contradicting each other on what is a very important issue in terms of the ways in which government understands and is approaching the week-long unrest that we have seen. Is it an insurrection or not? And who really should we be believing?
Well, that's correct, Kathy. There has been a lot of confusion, especially after those comments that we had last night from the Minister of Defence, where she told Parliament that in her view she has not seen any evidence suggesting that this was an insurrection, in directly contradicting what the President had said earlier on, and also that something that he also repeated yesterday. But I think more than anything, this issue also points back to the governing party, because we do know that the ANC has actually said that some of its members had been involved in this so-called insurrection and also as part of the unrest. And I think that to answer these questions, we have the appropriate person joining us now, which is the Deputy Secretary General of the ANC, Jesse Duarte. Ms. Duarte, thank you very much for your time. I think perhaps we can start here, given the fact that the ANC is the governing party. Do you believe this was a failed insurrection?
Well, one would identify an insurrection by what you know and what you observe. So firstly, what was our observation? It was quite clear that this was well planned. It was executed in a particular manner. The attack on malls, for instance, in particular areas, an attack on township economies, to make people angry, and that's what the intention would have been, was to rile up the anger of people. And secondly, it is to create a atmosphere of fear by sending out messages, really war talk messages. You know, there's messages running throughout, the same messages running over and over again. They've stopped now, but that was what was happening. And also the question is, and that we must accept, is that if it was not an insurrection, then why was there burning after looting? You know, the normal thing that would happen is, we live in a country where people are extremely poor, and when you are enticed to loot, you might find it impossible to reject that. Sure. But there was also a methodology. We've spoken to our people on the ground. They say that, well, what happened was, you'd find a few people arriving in Vito's combi-like vehicles. They'd start throwing windows broken, and then they would leave, and the community would rush in and begin to loot. But it doesn't end there. Sure. Once that is over, they would burn, and then later on, people would come and strip for anything that they could find, such as copper wire and so on. So the intention is what you look at, and the intention was to make sure that people became very angry. But let me say this quickly so that I don't forget it. What has impressed us, and we want to say thank you, is the fact that we saw people's power in action, where communities stood up and defended township economies in many places. And that was a good thing to do. You know, even if the police was stretched, there was working with the police, the CPFs came on board, and people and community organizations stood up and stood firm and said, we will not tolerate looting here. Sure. So I think that's an important issue to remember. Sure. Then also that it happens in two provinces, Gauteng and KZN, and it didn't really spread throughout the country.
It's actually interesting that you are raising the point about those two provinces. I'll come back to them a bit later, but I just want us to listen a bit to what the Minister of Defence said in Parliament yesterday before I come to my second question. Let's listen in.
What we see, in fact, we've also had people making reference to insurrection, coup, and the issue is, if it's an insurrection, then the insurrection must have a face. If it's an insurrection against government. If it is about a coup, the coup will also have a face. But none of those so far talk to that. Our view is that we probably are seeing signs of a counter-revolution, which is creeping in the form of criminality and thuggery, and of course it's a very unfortunate situation.
Now, Deputy Secretary General, that is the Minister of Defence, who also is a member of the ANC, NEC, and if we understand government and how it works, you have a president who is the chief pronouncer on all issues and every other voice being subordinate to that. What should we then make of this mixed messaging?
Okay, I don't play a lot with on the words that people are using, and I'm saying that what we need to do and recognize is that this was planned. Now, yes, it was faceless, and to an extent it was faceless, with the exception of, I think I only know of one person who's now been arrested, who was from KwaZulu-Natal thus far. But the messaging and the intention was to make the country angry and to allow it to lift off into a full-blown conflict situation.
But should we then not then make sure that at this crucial time, at least the government speaks in one voice instead of confusing South Africans?
I think you're trying to get me involved in a conversation that would say who's right and who's wrong. What has happened cannot be described in any other way than the way that I think our president did. He said he did not use the word coup. I don't know where that comes from. I didn't hear
he used the word insurrection.
Yes,
and an attempt to undermine our democracy. And
indeed, whether we like it or not, it was an attempt to undermine our democracy. How else do you explain an over 17 billion rands worth of damage to infrastructure that services primarily black South Africans?
Sure.
You're taking their food away from them. The food shortage in itself is still something that we are grappling with. And it's not going to go away very quickly because the food supply line was completely destructed and people were blocking roads. The N3 was blocked and so on and so forth. So this was an attempt to undermine our democracy. And it was an attempt to make people extremely angry and perhaps get them to take up arms against the state, perhaps.
Now you made an interesting
and people
point.
did in some townships, like they fought each other in a very racist way. It even brought about the ugly side of our nation that we need to fix.
Now, you made a very interesting observation earlier about the concentration of this violence to KwaZulu-Natal and some parts of Gauteng. And I think also the former Army General Siphiwe Nyanda makes the very point in a piece that he penned today, where he talks about the province of KwaZulu-Natal. And he mentions the issue which has been brought up time and again, the cult of a personality, the cult of personality that has been built around the former president. Now, looking at the concentration of that violence and that mayhem to KwaZulu-Natal particularly, and then Gauteng coming through the hostels, do you not believe that the ANC should take some level of responsibility in terms of how it mobilized around the former president, using him as a rallying point, particularly in KwaZulu-Natal, going to the 2009 elections? Well,
I don't think that we must blame the ANC and the president and former president for all of this on his own. I really don't know if that's really a correct analysis. And I think that for us the issue is, and I'm going to stand by that within the ANC, the tipping point that people were looking for was the incarceration of Comrade Zuma. And they used that tipping point to actually manipulate the poverty of our people in such a manner that they would create a state of instability for the country and a state of violent instability for the country. So it's a bit bigger than Comrade Zuma, who is in a prison cell, who is not, you know, and I'm sorry, but I have to say this, and it's not a defense mechanism. I'm saying that people who planned this looked for that tipping point, and I think it was an opportune moment when it did come. It came for them at a moment that they perhaps didn't even expect.
But I would
when
argue,
it came,
I would argue that you cannot completely absolve him of that, because two things. When there was that big event in Nkandla, there was a video that circulated where he was addressing Amabuto, where he actually ridiculed the legal process, saying that the people will never allow for him to go to jail. So effectively saying that people should stand in his defense. But also, given the fact of the violence that we've seen over the past few days, we've not said a word from him, although his foundation has been communicating. So you cannot effectively then absolve him of that.
He's been in prison.
I agree. I'm saying that his foundation has been expressing itself.
And prisoners don't make statements. But let me just say this. I think that Comrade Zuma has always criticized the legal system, right? I mean, it's 15 to 20 years now that he's been critical since the very beginning of the arms deal accusations against him. He's been critical. So to me, hearing him criticize the legal system was not a call to arms. I doubt very much if that was a call to arms. What was indeed a call for people to go and loot is somebody else saying, go and loot responsibly. I didn't understand that. Another one, a lot of messages on Facebook and WhatsApp groups that called for people to burn everything. So the tipping point for many people was the incarceration of Comrade Zuma. And I really I'm certainly not going to get into a conversation where I'm going to be put into a position where I now have to say the fault of this is X, Y, Z. It was faceless in the beginning.
Yep.
We understood that for months on end, there were people meeting in eThekwini. There were people meeting to discuss this. There was a whole lot of meetings that came, but I must be honest and say we did not expect it to pan out in the way that it did. I think was a sense that no, people wouldn't go that far. True. You know, they wouldn't want to push the government to the brink in this manner.
Sure.
All that having been said, we are standing firm on the rule of law, and we defend the constitution of our country. We chose a constitutional democracy. We're going to stand by it, and we're not going to tolerate this violence. And sure, we've mobilized our communities to stand up against it. And I think that should show you that the core of the ANC is not going to be standing still and allowing this to continue.
ANC Deputy Secretary General Jesse Duarte, thank you for your time. We are out of time. So effectively, they're agreeing with the president, not in so many words, that this was, after all, planned, and suggesting that it was an insurrection. And I'm sure